It's hard to stand out in the American model railroad scene. With the coming of dieselization really beginning in the 1930s, railroads began to see standardized motive power with only the most minor differences between locomotives bought by owners. These diesel locomotives are very popular among modelers since they can virtually fulfill a motive power requirement of nearly any railroad. Diesel locomotives tend to be thought of as boring, but that's a conversation for another day. Diesel locomotives in model form take on many forms, but it's hard to find one diesel locomotive offered by only one manufacturer. A lot of these locomotives are not standout models. They're good for sure, but not something you'd really brag about. But that's not the case for a certain manufacturer that burst onto the scene in 2015. That manufacturer is Scaletrains. This is their GP30, a model of a railfan favorite prototype ordered by 30 different railroads, and that has been offered in HO scale since 1962. Its high asking price seems astronomical for what is effectively a 59-foot GP unit, but there is a common motif of you get what you pay for, and this locomotive may just be the best example in model railroading of that. First off, getting one of these. Scaletrains is a brand that I don't blame people for not really knowing about. You actually have to actively search for them, but their products are by no means hard to find. Just a quick Google search, and you will find that they have a pretty good online presence. For me, I ordered online, and the nice thing about ordering a Scaletrains product online is it really doesn't matter who you order from. The prices generally stay in the exact same range. Don't order on eBay, those are just resellers. When my locomotive arrived, the box it came in was absolutely destroyed. I feared I had to send it back, but the Scaletrains box is so good that it still perfectly protected the locomotive even through that. The box is a very durable feeling thing, and Scaletrains use a very similar box for all their products. This is the Rivet Counter Edition GP30, and the locomotive schematics on the box make it a very appealing looking package. The locomotive type and specifics are just decals, so I wouldn't be surprised if this exact box is used for another locomotive. Opening up the box, you're greeted by the owner's manual. It's one of the best manuals I think I've ever seen, including prototype history on top of the usual maintenance and function map. Removing the foam, you are greeted by a clamshell with the locomotive inside. The locomotive is protected by plastic on both the top and bottom, has foam between the handrails and long hood, and protected pieces of plastic that click into the trucks to protect the amazing truck detail. With the locomotive out of the box, all I have to say is, wow, how far we have come since the first plastic GP30 model in 1962. I opted for the Conrail version because of course I did. Number 2232 was originally built for the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1963 and bears a couple Pennsylvania Railroad exclusive features. The most obvious sign of this was the cab signal box with the Penske's pulse code signal system that is located on the engineer's side of the short hood. The Pennsylvania Railroad also utilized their unique electromagnetic inductive coupling train phone from the 1930s until the advent of two-way radio in the 1960s. Despite being built at the end of the system's use, Pennsylvania Railroad GP30 still came equipped with it. When Penn Central removed these large antennas in the 1960s, the mounts remained, and the ex-Penske GP30s retained these unique mounts, and the model faithfully recreates that. There's also this ribbed roof on the top of the cab. I'm not a Penske fanatic, and I couldn't find a single person who knows the purpose of this, so maybe part of a rebuild or potentially just an aesthetic choice. You can't unsee this after someone points it out to you, but later built GP30s have one cab side longer than the other. Pennsylvania railroads were no exception, and this model fully recreates that faithfully. Most HO scale GP30 models have this unique feature, but it should be noted that Scaletrains and Proto 2000 both offer a standard cab as well. Inside the cab of this locomotive, it's one of the few diesel locomotives I've purchased that actually includes a cab interior. It's not painted or anything, but it's a nice touch and cab figures would look very good inside of it. The windows slide open and close, but however they do tend to get stuck, so take caution if you do so. Some more general features shared between the GP30s that Scaletrains makes include a brass horn mounted in different spots, Sinclair ice skate styled antennas, and separate underbody detail including plumbing and sanding lines. All GP30s, as of writing, come with a 2,600-gallon fuel tank. The model also features metal grabs on the front, rear, and the distinctive top one along the rear radiator fan. So let's compare it to my other favorite GP30 model, the Proto 2000 GP30. And just for fun, here's a 1978 Lionel HO GP30. All three boast similar proportions, as they should, and the Proto is by all means a fabulous model. I could gush about these things for days, but even the mighty Proto can't hold a candle to the Scaletrains offering. Both are meant to be expensive units, but the Proto lacks the super fine scale detail that Scaletrains. Not an issue with it, this is a 20-plus-year-old model after all. Best spot to see the attention to detail in the Scaletrains locomotive, however, is in the radiator fans, the sand hatch, the turbo exhaust, small printed text along the locomotive, and the fuel filler cap. Both have excellent lettering quality, but the printing on the Proto actually feels slightly compressed. Not to mention the inexcusable blue used on this locomotive. It simply looks awful. Tyco had a better CR blue. The detail doesn't stop at the body either. Most trucks on model trains look good anymore, but these are above and beyond. First off, painted wheels. I've never seen an HO scale diesel locomotive with painted wheels before, and it's just one of many little things on this model that make it truly pop and stand out. Before we put the GP30 on the track, there's one major thing you may have noticed me gloss over. These. They may look similar to a certain piece of garbage from a certain manufacturer that's fallen off a cliff in recent years, but rest assured, these are not McHenry's. These are Scaletrains in-house type E-couplers. They are all metal couplers and definitely one of the better looking couplers on the market. I would have liked to have seen some standard KD couplers included, but these have proven to be more than reliable. Putting the GP30 on the track, it immediately shows some life the moment it receives power. This locomotive has lights on the running board steps, the ground lights under the cab, as well as the typical number boards, headlight, and marker lights. Just those little details that continue to take this model to new heights. Starting locomotive up, it has a pretty faithful sounding EMD 567D3 prime mover coming from a Locksound 5 decoder. One minor nitpick with this sound set is the lack of any spitter valve noises, but that's just a minor nitpick, so we'll move on. The locomotive has 2 speakers as well as ESU's power pack, keep alive system for smooth sailing over dirty track. And smooth this locomotive is. The locomotive boasts a 5-pole motor and is capable of running at speed step 1 and maintains a realistic speed throughout its entire range. The locomotive does whatever not tipping the scales is and weighs in at 13.9 ounces. Commendable, enough to pull reasonably sized trains on level track. However, it is beaten out by the Proto GP30, which weighs in at 1 pound 1 ounce. Checks out, the chassis of the Proto GP30 is just a die-cast brick. The Proto is by far the superior puller, it is no contest, but the Scaletrains GP30 was by far the quieter runner when all the sounds were disabled. Speaking of sounds, the locomotive has 31 functions. That's more than my club's throttle will even let me use. We'll note that the owner's manual says F3 is coupler crank. It is not. My F3 from the factory was the handbrake, so some functions in the manual may not be the same as what is presented on your model. Of course, that's all changeable through some CV values and a computer program. So I've now spent about a month with this locomotive, and I've run it about any chance I could at my club. It has been almost problem-free, and I really mean almost. There's one issue. One of the sanding lines managed to dislodge itself from the frame and created consistent derailments my first week of operating the locomotive. I have just removed it since, but it's still annoying that it happened virtually out of the box. Other than that, the locomotive has remained trouble-free, and I have no doubt that it will continue to be issue-free for some time to come. The locomotive has probably racked up about 12 to 15 hours of running time as of recording this, with varying train lengths and an occasional doubleheader with my beloved Intermountain GP10. It'll muscle about 15 cars around the club layout, even up some fairly steep grades. The locomotive has a bit of momentum on by default, but it's not uncontrollable, and of course it can be changed if desired. The locomotive's dual speakers make for quite the show when in use. They're nice and loud, but not deafening like my Broadway Limited Mikado is. It is a happy medium, although on a home layout it may be wise to turn it down a little bit. So what's the verdict here? I'm intentionally a bit nicer to models because I take into account the context they were released in. But for a model like this, I really wanted to have some critical thoughts in this. But it's hard to criticize something that I just don't have anything to criticize about in the first place. There's no other way to say it. This is the definitive GP30 model for the super fans of the prototype. They say you can't put a price on art, but Scaletrain certainly has here, and a DC version will run you $200 and the sound version $300. It seems like a pretty steep asking price for a 4-axle diesel locomotive made mostly of plastic. This is going to be a cliche statement, but you get what you pay for. The ultra-fine details, the road-specific stuff, that silky smooth drive, it's all worth it. This is not a value-oriented locomotive like how Proto 2000 or modern Bachmann are doing things these days. It's not for the budget conscious. This is one for the fans, one for the perfectionists, the history books, but mostly a fitting and lasting tribute to Electromotive's icon of a freight locomotive.